My daughter tossed me out after getting $55 million, but she soon came back, desperate for help. Alice Turner stood in the modest kitchen of her small suburban home, the faint morning light casting soft shadows across the worn countertops. The aroma of brewing coffee mingled with the distant hum of the neighborhood waking up. Yet her heart felt heavy despite the routine calm. At 52 years old, she had spent the last 3 decades working tirelessly, often juggling 2 jobs, so that her only daughter, Jessica, could break free from the cycle of ordinary life and reach for something greater. Alice's hands, worn from years of labor, traced the outline of a faded photograph taped to the fridge. Jessica as a young girl, her eyes bright with curiosity, a promise unspoken but deeply felt. Jessica was now 25, freshly graduated with honors from a prestigious business school and brimming with ambition. Alice watched her daughter chase after opportunities with an intensity that both warmed and worried her. They had always loved each other, but the gap between their worlds, between Alice's humble upbringing and Jessica's rising aspirations, sometimes created invisible but sharp barriers in their conversations. The dreams Jessica nurtured were vast. The life Alice envisioned for her daughter was one of dignity, yet grounded in the values of kindness and perseverance. That afternoon, Jessica called Alice from her downtown apartment, her voice crackling with excitement. A distant relative, an uncle Alice had barely met, had left Jessica a staggering inheritance, $55 million. The sudden wealth promised freedom from financial worries and a chance to experience the luxury Jessica had long admired from afar. But as the days passed, the gleam in Jessica's eyes shifted subtly. The girl who had once held her mother's hand for reassurance was now talking about a life far removed from their modest home. One filled with glamorous parties, designer clothes, and social circles Alice couldn't imagine. The distance grew quickly. Invitations for coffee became scarce, and conversations turned terse or distracted. Alice felt the sting of rejection, but remained hopeful, believing that the bond they shared would outlast material ambitions. Yet, on a chilly autumn evening, everything came crashing down. Jessica, in the dazzling glow of her new mansion, glittering chandeliers, aggressive glam, and an entourage to match, hosted a party to celebrate her newfound fortune. Alice had hesitated, but agreed to attend, dressed simply, nervous among the boisterous crowd of strangers. As the party swirled with laughter and clinking glasses, a sudden hush fell over the room. Jessica's tone sharpened as she spoke, calling out her mother to the gathered guests. "Mom, I appreciate what you've done, but it's time you understand, you don't belong here anymore." The words hit Alice like a physical blow. Humiliated, she felt every eye on her, prickling with the heat of shame. Jessica's expression was cold, resolute. "This is my life now. You need to leave." Alice's throat tightened. Her mind spun, not fully comprehending how things had spiraled to such cruelty in one night. She gathered her composure, quietly packing a small bag, the weight of years of love and sacrifice seeming to vanish into thin air. With a final, lingering glance at the life she had built for her daughter, she stepped out into the cold night, her heart breaking not just from rejection, but from the harshness of the woman her little girl was becoming. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing a chapter marked by humiliation and the painful birth of an uncertain future. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a flicker of resilience remained, waiting to ignite. The days that followed were a blur of silence and solitude for Alice. Her modest apartment, with peeling wallpaper and creaky floors, felt colder than ever. The echo of Jessica's words haunted her, a relentless reminder of how quickly love could be overshadowed by pride and wealth. Friends who once called lessened their invitations, uncomfortable perhaps with the sudden change in the family dynamic or unsure how to approach the scandal that had silently rippled through their close-knit community. Alice found herself navigating not only a new physical space, but an emotional wasteland where her value seemed diminished to that single, crushing moment at the party. Every morning, she stood by the window, watching the suburb she had known for years. Families chatting over fences, children playing beneath golden trees. Yet the warmth they held felt distant, as if she herself had become a stranger to the place she called home. The looks of pity or avoidance from neighbors deepened the wound Jessica's rejection had opened. Yet, Alice refused to let despair claim her completely. She threw herself into volunteer work at the local community center, distributing meals and organizing book clubs. In those moments, amid stories of struggle and perseverance from others, she found threads of strength she hadn't realized were still woven through her spirit. Meanwhile, Jessica's life within the glossy walls of her mansion looked enviable from the outside, but cracks soon appeared beneath the surface glitter. Her decisions with the inheritance quickly spiraled into mishaps. She trusted a flashy financial advisor, who disappeared after swindling a significant portion of her fortune. Old friends, drawn by money, faded away once the accounts dwindled. The social circles that once celebrated her extravagance turned cold or indifferent as her luck ran dry. The endless parties became fewer and filled with awkward silences and forced smiles. Investments meant to multiply her wealth only worsened her financial standing, and Jessica's buoyant confidence steadily crumbled. Beneath the facade of luxury, loneliness gnawed at her relentlessly. Jessica's heart ached for the unconditional love she had given up in pursuit of status. Yet every attempt to reach out to Alice was met with walls of hurt and silence, rooted in the pain of that harsh dismissal. This bitter cycle deepened Jessica's shame and desperation. She found herself questioning the very values she once scorned. Those simple demonstrations of meekness and perseverance she had mistaken for weakness. The irony settled heavy on her chest. All the opulence in the world couldn't salvage the emptiness left by broken trust and severed family ties. Alice, from her quiet corner, became aware of Jessica's growing troubles through mutual acquaintances, though no one dared confront her directly. The ache to reach out warred with the sting of humiliation she still carried. She wondered quietly why the daughter who once confided her dreams over countless late-night talks had evolved into a stranger, citing riches as reason for rejection. In this slow unraveling, the roles shifted. Jessica, once the confident achiever, now needed help, and Alice, despite her wounds, was the one left standing with kindness still intact. Through late-night hours, thick with sorrow, Alice found herself reflecting how fragile and fleeting was social status, how easily it could corrupt love, and how much strength was truly required to forgive. To anyone feeling crushed by the weight of judgment or betrayal, Alice's experience whispered a profound truth. Healing begins not by holding grudges, but by nurturing the small sparks of empathy and understanding left smoldering beneath the ashes of pain. Sometimes, the hardest battles are won quietly within. And sometimes, true courage is simply refusing to shut the door forever on those we love. If you've ever felt cast aside or misunderstood by those closest to you, remember, every fall contains the seed of a new rise. The journey back is painful, but redemption waits in the brave decision to keep believing in second chances. Alice's mornings began to blend into one another, each sunrise folding into the next with a solemn predictability. She wrestled with loneliness, yet refused to let it define her. At the small community center where she volunteered, her days were filled with the stories of others who, like her, had stumbled but chose to carry on. Helping those struggling to find their own footing gave Alice a quiet purpose, a fragile thread of hope. Yet, every time she thought of Jessica, a stab of sorrow returned, like a deep ache protected by layers of resilience she was still building. Determined to reclaim some control over her life, Alice sought out local workshops on financial literacy and personal growth, hoping to not just survive, but to find new ways to thrive. The workshops were small, informal gatherings in a humble library room, far from the opulence Jessica had embraced. Yet they were rich with human connection, shared struggles, wisdom from hard-earned lessons, and laughter amid tears. Here, Alice met Marlene, a retired counselor with soft eyes and a patient heart, who became an unexpected mentor. Marlene reminded Alice that dignity isn't housed in money or social standing, but in how one treats oneself and others, even in the face of rejection. For a time, these new relationships kindled a fleeting warmth that pierced the coldness of rejection. Alice began to pick up small freelance gigs, writing heartfelt letters for local businesses, tutoring neighborhood kids. But every venture was met with obstacles. Technology seemed a foreign language, opportunities were scarce, and loneliness often eclipsed her small victories. Each setback felt like a whisper of doubt, threatening to convince her that the world had moved on without her. Meanwhile, Jessica's palace of fortune began to show unmistakable cracks. Invitations she sent went unanswered. The laughter on her calls felt hollow. The gold-plated facade masked an unraveling soul. One afternoon, after a harsh argument with a business partner, she found herself alone in the vast, echoing halls of her mansion, the silence pressing down with an almost physical weight. The late-night calls to her socialite friends were met with polite excuses or abrupt hang-ups. Celebrity acquaintances she had toasted with at parties vanished like shadows at dawn. The glitter of her wealth was no shield against the sting of abandonment. Jessica became deeply aware that the envy and admiration she once commanded had evaporated, leaving her exposed and fragile. She realized too late that she had burned bridges with her mother, the one person whose unconditional faith had been her anchor all along. The growing press of financial missteps only deepened the pit of despair under her feet, and her pride wrestled viciously against the urge to ask for help. One evening, after a sleepless night weighted with anxiety, Jessica found herself scrolling through old photos on her phone, images of simpler days, shared laughter with her mother, whispered dreams they once held together. A knot tightened in her chest. In those frozen frames, she glimpsed what truly mattered: love, trust, and connection, gifts she had carelessly set aside for glittering illusions. Yet reaching out was far from easy. Humiliation and fear tangled into a web she wasn't sure she could unravel. Would Alice welcome her with open arms or slam the door forever? Meanwhile, Alice, despite her own wounds, remained ready somewhere deep inside to offer forgiveness and hope. But both women stood poised on the edge of an uncertain crossing, where the past's shadows threatened to swallow their future. In moments like these, when life seems unbearable, remember that even the most fragile ember can kindle a blaze when nurtured with care. To anyone feeling powerless or lost, take heart. Sometimes the darkest moments hold the seeds of the most profound transformations. Cling to hope. Keep reaching. The path to reconciliation and healing begins with that first, courageous step. The breaking point came on a rainy evening that seemed to match the storm raging inside Jessica's heart. Her once glittering existence had dissolved into a series of devastating losses. The financial advisor who had promised to manage her multi-million-dollar inheritance vanished overnight, taking a sizable portion of her fortune with him. The lavish mansion, once filled with light and laughter, now echoed cold and empty, a stark reminder of choices made in haste. Friends, those attracted by wealth more than by genuine connection, slowly retreated, their smiles replaced by indifference or thinly veiled contempt. Jessica sat alone at the grand dining table, the fine china untouched, her fingers trembling over a pile of overdue bills and legal notices. Debt collectors' calls pinged incessantly on her phone, each one a dagger twisting deeper into her sense of control. In that moment, the unbearable weight of loneliness overwhelmed her. She picked up the phone, hesitating, hands shaking as she scrolled to her mother's contact. The notion of calling Alice was both humiliating and terrifying. Would she open the door to the girl who had cast her away? Would she forgive the daughter who once spat harsh words and pushed her into the cold? Meanwhile, Alice wrestled with her own torrent of painful emotions. Each day, as she volunteered at the community center or helped with neighborhood projects, she felt the persistent ache of absence, not just of Jessica's presence in her life, but of the trust that had been shattered so publicly. The harsh rejection during that fateful party played endlessly in her mind, like a cruel echo bouncing off the walls of her soul. Yet amidst the hurt, a quiet flame of hope flickered, fueled by the belief that love, even when wounded, never truly dies. One afternoon, as Alice sorted donations for a local shelter, her phone vibrated. Jessica's name illuminated the screen. The world seemed to stop before she swallowed the lump in her throat and answered hesitantly. Jessica's voice was fragile, laced with desperation and regret. "Mom, I don't know where else to turn. Please, can you help me?" The words, so simple yet so heavy, broke something open within Alice. All the pride bruised into silence and scorn dissolved into a rush of maternal love and compassion. "Come home, Jessica," she whispered. Voice steady, but trembling with emotion. "We'll figure it out, together." That call marked a turning point, but it wasn't the end of the pain. The humiliation looming over Jessica was immense. The thought of facing Alice and the community after years of neglect and arrogance was daunting. And for Alice, the choice to open her door again risked reopening the deep wounds of betrayal. Yet in that moment, both women recognized the fragile beauty of forgiveness and the chance for renewal. Jessica arrived at Alice's modest apartment, clutching a small suitcase, eyes scanning the room with vulnerability she had long buried beneath wealth and status. The reunion was quiet. No grand speeches or dramatic apologies, just two souls reconnecting amid tears and hesitant smiles. Alice embraced her daughter tightly, a tacit understanding passing between them that the road ahead would demand patience, humility, and unwavering love. For those who have faced the sting of rejection or the heavy shadow of failure, remember this: sometimes the depths of despair prepare us for the most profound growth. The greatest acts of courage are often quiet. A phone call, a door opened, a heart softened. There, amid brokenness, lies the possibility of healing, renewal, and strength beyond measure. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by difficult circumstances, take solace in knowing that no setback defines your worth. The journey back is hard, but every step toward forgiveness and love lights the path toward a brighter tomorrow. After the crushing public reprimand during the office meeting, Sophia felt like the weight of the world had pressed down on her chest. The cold stares from her coworkers, the whispered comments brushing past her like a chilling breeze, and the bitter tone in Carla's voice echoed relentlessly in her mind. That night, alone in her small apartment, Sophia stared at the ceiling, the neon city lights casting unsteady shadows through her blinds. She felt invisible and exposed all at once, a strange, painful contradiction. The following days unfolded like a slow-motion nightmare. Every glance from colleagues, every hushed conversation when she passed by, seemed stitched with judgment. Even minor tasks felt monumental, as if the walls themselves were waiting for her to slip again. Her confidence, once a quiet but steady flame, flickered toward extinction. But deep inside, faint embers of hope flickered. She couldn't escape the voice in her mind that whispered, "This is not who you are. You're stronger than they think." One afternoon, while retrieving files from the shared supply room, Sophia accidentally bumped into Mia, a quieter coworker who had always been somewhat peripheral in their circle. Mia's eyes widened briefly, then softened with a genuine smile. "Hey, Sophia," she said softly. "I know how that meeting went. I'm really sorry you had to go through that." Their brief exchange felt like a lifeline. For the first time since the humiliation, Sophia found herself wanting to reach out, to break the isolation that had been wrapping around her like a suffocating shroud. She started paying closer attention to the handful of people who never joined the chorus of judgment, and Mia's quiet kindness became a small, steady beacon. But even with this newfound subtle support, the path ahead was far from clear. At the weekly team meeting, though minor in nature, Sophia's presentation stumbled. A small technical issue with her slides amplified her trembling voice, and she could feel the eyes drifting away, doubts growing. The sting was sharp, reminding her how fragile her standing felt. Later, during a late afternoon walk in the nearby park, Sophia's mind wrestled with the swirling emotions: shame, anger, hope, and a desperate wish for change. It was there, under the tangled branches and fading sunlight, that she unexpectedly overheard a conversation between two colleagues she barely knew. Their words revealed a different story. Carla, the relentless antagonist, was handing out assignments with favoritism and had recently been intervening to discredit others who might challenge her. Sophia's heart raced. This was the first tangible clue that the humiliation she'd endured was part of a larger pattern of manipulation and fear. Suddenly, her feelings of helplessness were tempered by a spark of clarity. The injustice wasn't hers alone. Others at the office had doubts buried beneath their silence. That evening, Sophia messaged Mia cautiously, sharing what she had overheard. Mia's reply was swift and warm. "You're not alone in this. Maybe it's time we stand together." For the first time in weeks, the future shimmered with possibility, and Sophia felt the faint pulse of courage, ready to unsettle the heavy shadows cast by humiliation and power. If you've ever been knocked down by unfair judgment, remember that sometimes the first step toward healing is finding a single person who believes in you. The journey is hard, but the breakthrough comes when you start to see the cracks in the wall of silence. Days passed as Sophia and Mia carefully gathered small pieces of evidence, snippets of conversations, subtle changes in meeting agendas, and documents revealing a pattern of favoritism that extended beyond what Sophia had imagined. The quiet courage that Sophia once thought impossible was now beginning to rise like a tide, strong enough to challenge the storm that had engulfed her. The moment of reckoning came unexpectedly during an all-hands meeting. Carla, perched in her usual spot at the head of the room, wore an air of smug control, clearly eager to dominate the conversation. As usual, she launched into a superficial review of the team's performance. But something was different, because Sophia was ready. She stood up, heart pounding, but her voice steady. "Carla, I have something important to share about the project assignments and some irregularities we've all felt but never voiced." A hush fell over the room, surprise rippling through the group. Sophia's fingers trembled slightly as she laid out her findings with clear factual evidence. A pattern of manipulated deadlines, singled-out criticisms, and covert favoritism towards certain employees. She spoke without anger, but with a clarity that cut through the usual noise. Carla's face paled, the confident mask slipping to reveal vulnerability for the very first time. Her usual allies exchanged uneasy glances as whispers erupted among the team. The room, once heavy with criticism and shame for Sophia, now crackled with tension, but in her favor. Unexpectedly, several colleagues stepped forward, confirming what Sophia had said, sharing their own experiences suppressed by fear or embarrassment. The collective voice, once fractured, began to unite, transforming the space that had been a source of humiliation into a forum for truth and accountability. Carla's attempts to regain control faltered. Her defensive remarks sounded hollow as the team listened instead to Sophia's calm persistence and the factual revelations that exposed the toxicity beneath the surface. The manager overseeing the meeting, who had been silently observing until then, finally spoke up. "We will launch a formal inquiry into these issues immediately. Thank you, Sophia, for your bravery." A wave of relief swept over Sophia, but it was tinged with apprehension. The battle wasn't over. Systems rarely change overnight. Yet this moment marked a turning point, the power of speaking truth, even when surrounded by fear and humiliation. As Sophia took her seat, the team's energy shifted. Instead of avoidance, she felt quiet respect from many, including some who had been silently watching her struggle. Mia caught her eye and gave an encouraging nod, a small smile affirming the bond forged through adversity. Later that day, Sophia's phone buzzed. A message from a senior executive she barely knew read, "I heard what you did today. That took courage. If you ever want to talk about next steps or need support, I'm here. The unexpected kindness and recognition reassured Sophia that by facing humiliation head-on, she had opened doors she hadn't even dared to imagine. If you're standing in the middle of a storm, remember this: courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to face it with honesty. True strength often reveals itself through the support we find when we speak our truth. The path to justice may begin with a trembling voice, but it can end with lasting change. The days following the meeting unfolded like a whirlwind. Sophia found herself at the center of a quiet transformation as the formal inquiry gained momentum. Emails, interviews, and private conversations filled her hours, each revealing more pieces of the puzzle she and Mia had only glimpsed before. The atmosphere at the office was tense but different, no longer suffocating with silent judgment, but pulsing with a strange current of possibility. Carla, once so confident and dismissive, began to falter visibly. Her sharp remarks grew fewer. Her gaze avoided Sophia's with a mixture of resentment and fear. The very colleagues who had stood on the sidelines now whispered in hushed voices, emboldened by Sophia's bravery. The walls of shame and isolation that had held her captive started to crumble. One afternoon, during a lunch break, Sophia overheard Carla attempting to undermine the inquiry by spreading rumors. But the tide had turned. When Carla spoke, only a few remained silent witnesses. Most had grown wary of her manipulation. Witnesses came forward with more honest accounts, painting a clear picture of the toxic environment Carla had fostered. Throughout it all, Sophia found her own strength growing, not just in the small victories, but in the way she began to reclaim her dignity. The constant anxiety that once gnawed at her chest gave way to a steadier breath. Friends and allies, both old and new, appeared, offering support beyond what she expected. People who had been silent out of fear now stood beside her with quiet determination. The inquiry culminated in a company-wide meeting. The CEO addressed the team directly, acknowledging systemic flaws and committing to concrete actions to rebuild trust and fairness. Carla was relieved of her managerial duties pending further review. A clear message that toxic behavior would no longer be tolerated. Sophia stood at the back of the room, watching the scene unfold with a sense of cautious triumph. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about reshaping the culture that had enabled cruelty to flourish. Her voice had catalyzed something bigger than herself. Her colleagues approached her with genuine smiles and words of encouragement, small gestures that felt monumental after months of cold shoulders and whispered doubts. Mia clasped her hand tightly and whispered, "You did it. You changed everything." That evening, as Sophia walked home beneath a glowing street lamp, she allowed herself a moment to sink into the quiet warmth of victory. This was more than justice. It was restoration. A chance not only to heal, but to build something better. Sometimes the path from humiliation to healing is jagged and long, but every step towards standing up for yourself echoes louder than the first humiliation. Sophia's journey was proof that no matter how deep the fall, reclaiming your voice can set you free. Days passed as Sophia and Mia carefully gathered small pieces of evidence, snippets of conversations, subtle changes in meeting agendas, and documents revealing a pattern of favoritism that extended beyond what Sophia had imagined. The quiet courage that Sophia once thought impossible was now beginning to rise like a tide, strong enough to challenge the storm that had engulfed her. The moment of reckoning came unexpectedly during an all-hands meeting. Carla, perched in her usual spot at the head of the room, wore an air of smug control, clearly eager to dominate the conversation. As usual, she launched into a superficial review of the team's performance. But something was different, because Sophia was ready. She stood up, heart pounding but her voice steady. "Carla, I have something important to share about the project assignments and some irregularities we'd all felt but never voiced." A hush fell over the room, surprise rippling through the group. Sophia's fingers trembled slightly as she laid out her findings with clear, factual evidence. A pattern of manipulated deadlines, singled-out criticisms, and covert favoritism towards certain employees. She spoke without anger, but with a clarity that cut through the usual noise. Carla's face paled, the confident mask slipping to reveal vulnerability for the very first time. Her usual allies exchanged uneasy glances as whispers erupted among the team. The room, once heavy with criticism and shame for Sophia, now crackled with tension, but in her favor. Unexpectedly, several colleagues stepped forward, confirming what Sophia had said, sharing their own experiences suppressed by fear or embarrassment. The collective voice, once fractured, began to unite, transforming the space that had been a source of humiliation into a forum for truth and accountability. Carla's attempts to regain control faltered. Her defensive remarks sounded hollow as the team listened instead to Sophia's calm persistence and the factual revelations that exposed the toxicity beneath the surface. The manager overseeing the meeting, who had been silently observing until then, finally spoke up. "We will launch a formal inquiry into these issues immediately. Thank you, Sophia, for your bravery." A wave of relief swept over Sophia, but it was tinged with apprehension. The battle wasn't over. Systems rarely change overnight. Yet this moment marked a turning point. The power of speaking truth, even when surrounded by fear and humiliation. As Sophia took her seat, the team's energy shifted. Instead of avoidance, she felt quiet respect from many, including some who had been silently watching her struggle. Mia caught her eye and gave an encouraging nod, a small smile affirming the bond forged through adversity. Later that day, Sophia's phone buzzed. A message from a senior executive she barely knew read, "I heard what you did today. That took courage. If you ever want to talk about next steps or need support, I'm here." The unexpected kindness and recognition reassured Sophia that by facing humiliation head-on, she had opened doors she hadn't even dared to imagine. If you're standing in the middle of a storm, remember this. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to face it with honesty. True strength often reveals itself through the support we find when we speak our truth. The path to justice may begin with a trembling voice, but it can end with lasting change.